You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome, business developers, to another episode of Breaking BizDev, the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And Mark, you and I are at it again. We're going to beat up this nebulous term we call business development, and we're bringing in a few other podcasters to help us out with this one.
We are, and John, these guest voices that we are introducing and kind of bringing into our podcast are great data points to prove that we're not the only ones who think that business development is a little bit broken. So it's nice to have others join the chorus, so to speak, on this whole thing. And boy, we've got some good voices today, John.
Yep. Yeah, we do. We've got friends in a couple of other podcasts. You might have heard of them, Two Bobs and Rattle and Pedal, and Jason and Jeff and Blair and David. They are well respected and well known in the consulting world and the professional services world. So it's an honor to have their voices on this episode. And for folks that are listening, that's one thing that we want to do more of, is we do want to bring in more voices into future episodes because, well, you know, like you said, Mark, we're not the only ones that think business development is broken. And
right.
It's great to have, other perspective come in as well. I think it's valuable to our listeners, but it's also helpful, for our own knowledge of the industry and understanding of the industry too.
Right. Both of these podcasts have been so important to my growth, my thinking, my development over the years, and I'm sure, John, they've helped you as well as many others. These people, understood a long time ago that podcasts were an important part of, their either personal or their firm marketing. Their podcasts are on my regular playlist. When I'm out for my dog walks and I hear Jeff and Jason in my ear, or Blair and David. It's like you said, it's a pleasure and an honor to kind of have them and have them join us and weave their voices into Breaking BizDev. Every time I listen to their podcasts, I'm given the opportunity to look at things from a slightly different perspective. Either bringing new language, new words, just new thinking to it, and it's really refreshing. Their stuff always keeps me on my toes, which is fantastic.
And they were, I love their co-hosted commentary model, and it was definitely an inspiration for this show. And as we were, so these conversations with Jason and Jeff and David and Blair, as I was listening back to their responses, we both kind of noticed this. There's this like theme of like mindset and how that can really make or break your business development strategy. And both mindset, both individually, but then also kind of like at the level up, the organizational mindset, and kind of like this cultural mindset. Jeff alludes to that a little bit, and right. I just think it's so important. And Mark, you called this out in one of your 6 sales competencies, is that mindset is so critical.
That theme did kind of bubble up to the top, I think, for both of us, and it's the mindset, it's the attitude, it's the posture you have coming into the world of sales when you're engaged with a prospective client, as you're walking through this whole process together. It's so critical that we have our heads in the right place. And the fantastic thing is that our personal mindset, how we set our sails, to use a metaphor, are completely within our control. Right. We have the ability to set our mind, bring the right attitude, and sort of guide this whole process with a good sense of positive energy, momentum, enthusiasm. Because sales is hard, and the other thing I mentioned in that 6 sales competencies is this mindset is important because buying professional services is difficult, right? So we need to be a really good guide, and having the right mindset when we're coming into all of it is critical, not just for ourselves, but for our prospective clients who may be in an uncomfortable situation and just need a little bit of help.
I was on Twitter the other day, and this woman I follow, Ali Schwanke, she was posting about, what is the difference between marketing and sales, really? And I replied to her, and this is just my 2 cents on a gross oversimplification, but marketing is positioning, and sales is guiding buyers to making a decision.
Ooh, I like
And that was just kind of like in the heat of the moment. But then I was kind of reflecting on that. It's like, yeah, you know what? That's kind of really what marketing is positioning, and sales is kind of guiding those buyers. So you're right. I mean, you do need to make a distinction, and there is a different mindset that you need to bring to both of those scenarios. But then also, the common theme is it's all customer focused. And when you deviate from that and you start to think about yourself more than the customer, that's when things start to break down.
Right. It's and I talk about this all the time. It's that trusted advisor, trust equation thing where self-orientation destroys everything, right? You cannot present yourself as being trustworthy if you are self-oriented. It just kills the whole thing. So I stress that constantly is, your expertise, your experience, your credibility, all of those things are weighed down by any sense of self-orientation, and they are buoyed by a lack of self-orientation, right? This obsessive focus on others is critical. So anyway, we digress on this. I'm sure everyone is just excited and interested to hear from who I humbly call some of our professional services podcast colleagues. Let's dive in. We've got 4, and I think we're going to start with our friend Jason Mlicki, and he had some good things to share.
That's right. Well, without further ado, here comes Jason. In your opinion, what do you think is broken about the way professional services firms do business development today?
The whole thing. So I think that what I mean by that is I think a lot of firms, they've built their entire business development engine. I mean, roles, jobs, processes around rules of engagement that are set down by the seller. So the whole BD org for a lot of firms is really constructed to facilitate an RFP process that allows them to get themselves lined up like a bunch of apples at a grocery market for a client to pick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very reactive, as Jeff said. We don't even want to have a conversation until someone shows up with a clearly stated problem statement and money in hand. And then we will dial up this proposal machine and this pitch machine and go have interviews and presentations, and we're going to incur hundreds of thousands of dollars and proposal costs,
cost of sale
to stomach it. And what I'd like to see them do is be more proactive, go to the market with a more clear and distinct point of view, have a thought leadership agenda, have a business development unit that knows how to proactively take that thought leadership story and that point of view into the marketplace to have conversations with clients that lead to contracts without this kind of massive RFP engine having to be spun up. I've seen a lot of firms through the years that they think it's a win when their marketing activities generate an RFP. I actually think that's a failure.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. And the goal of marketing isn't to generate the RFP; it's to generate the conversation that hopefully supersedes the RFP and replaces it with a contract. So, and a lot of firms, what I'm seeing, like what I see when I say all that, is that the mindset of what I just said, they just can't even fathom that that's even a feasible thing.
Well, the nature of an RFP is a competitive scenario. And in those competitive scenarios, you ultimately end up competing based on price. And that's just waters that you don't want to wade into because that erodes your margins.
Yep.
But then because it's a competitive scenario, naturally your win rate's going to drop. And so then your cost of sale just skyrockets by the more RFPs that you respond to. And then I call it the RFP hamster wheel. Like once you're on, it's hard to get off.
You can't get off it. And a lot of firms just can't see any other possible way to do it. Like that, like they've done it this way for so long.
Yep.
And like you said, they've ridden this hamster wheel for so long. The win rates have been declining. The cost of sales has been going up. Well, we just got to put more in the top. Or just shove more in the top. That's how we're going to solve this problem. Like, well, no, that's not going to solve it at all. It's just going to make the problem worse.
So that was Jason Mlicki on, and I thought he brought up a couple of really good points, Mark, about the way that you construct your business development organization. Are you organizing your business development activities around responding to RFPs, or are you organizing them around what you like to say, creating new business?
You can hear in the conversation there and in Jason's comments that if you start building your organization around doing that one particular thing, responding to RFPs, being reactive, not being proactive, that just sort of snowballs. And you look around you and you're like, we can't do it any other way. It's just, we're just structurally built that way. And as you've said kind of many times, this old sort of RFP hamster wheel thing kind of just sets in. And it becomes sort of this immovable object where you're unable to reframe and rethink and bring a different mindset that says we need to create new business because we want to be the expert firm that we want to be, not that someone else wants us to be, right?
Yeah, totally. And I like to think about it. It's like, you're waiting for the market to come to you when you could be proactive and you could be going to the market. And it reminded me a lot of what we talked about on a recent episode around this iceberg analogy that you brought up, where you only see about 3 to 5% of the market that's actively in a buying scenario, buying decision. They're on a customer decision journey, but then most of it's underwater.
Yeah, that's hopefully people are picturing that visual, and I share that with the clients that I work with. And it is my hope that conversation is an aha moment for a lot of people when they realize that sort of the active buyers are a small percentage of the whole sort of addressable market. And that's, upwards of 90% or more of their potential future clients sit below the waterline. They're unseen, but they're there. And our goal is to engage with them in a proactive way so that we can move them into a place where they're actively buying and where we are well positioned to be their number one choice.
All right, well, let's hear what Jason's co-host, Jeff McKay, had to say about what he believes is broken in business development. Here comes Jeff.
The thing that's broken about business development is the thing that has been broken, I think, in time immemorial. And that is a selfish, I need to close business today. I need to close it fast. Give me a lead. Let me work it. And if you're not ready to buy, I'm moving on. It is the wrong mindset. It's a horrible mindset, and it just perpetuates. And my experience in research has borne out that people just absolutely hate that. But people continue to do it. Professional services, and I would say sales in general, but professional services specifically is a relationship-driven business, and it's becoming more so, with content marketing and AI, and we've had episodes on marketing and sales ruins everything. Yeah. But human connection is so important. And you cannot build human connection when you have a selfish mindset of, I want to get mine and I want to get it as fast as I can. And most people would say, oh, I don't have that mindset. But their actions would say differently. So when I look at what's broken, it's the mindset, because technology and particular types of skills and things evolve. But if you have the wrong core, and this goes with growth in sales and marketing, we've talked about it. Culture is at the heart. Culture is, kind of a firm perspective of mindset.
Yeah. I think Jeff brought up a really good point at the end, and I wanted to dig in a little bit more to what he had to say there about how this mindset, this short-sightedness kind of starts at the top of the organization. Sure, there is some intrinsic kind of motivation to maybe chasing after a commission, but where does that stem from? That stems from leadership.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And he brings up the often mentioned discussion around, professional service, new business development and professional services is driven by relationships. And we've all heard that in the past, but I think that we often can lose sight of that, particularly when we look at more contemporary ways of outreach, multi-channel marketing. There's a million things that can kind of get in the way and sort of fog our vision on all of this. So he comes back and he touches on the relationships end of things, and that, like you said, there needs to be a pervasive organizational culture that are focused on building relationships, coming into this whole thing with the right approach, the right attitude, the right posture, the one of service, the one of help, the one of guidance, rather than trying to chase after the dollars.
Yeah, having that low self-orientation.
Right.
I follow a guy named Josh Braun on LinkedIn.
Good.
He's a sales trainer.
Yeah.
He likes to refer to this as commission breath. Prospects can smell that commission breath coming from a mile away. And, that's why you have to have that low self-orientation and really focus on, creating value or creating a meaningful value exchange with your prospect. And it's not just a zero-sum game.
Right. And many people in professional services aren't sort of, they're not built in a way where they're slave to the commission approach to compensation, but people know exactly what we mean when we say that. It's just that whole, pushy, slimy, sleazy, salesy, whatever words you want to attach to it, that people completely just want to steer clear of.
Excellent. That is perspective from our good friends over at Rattle and Pedal. And if you're listening to this show, you will probably find that show valuable as well. So go check out Jason and Jeff over there.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyerman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
Another show that has inspired us and is a kind of a mainstay in all of business podcasts is Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. And I've been following David for about a decade at this point, and I love his perspective, love his content. I've floated in and out of listening to Two Bobs. So it was an honor to be able to interview them and kind of get their perspective on podcasting in general. But I thought they both brought up some really good perspective on what's broken in business development, and it's very similar to what Jason and Jeff had to say. So yeah, let's hear what David has to say, and then Mark, you and I can unpack it. So Great. Here comes David C. Baker. So my question is, and David, we can start with you. What's one thing you think is completely broken about the way firms go about developing new business today?
Well, there are a lot of things broken about how people go about new business. It's like, where do you want to start? But actually, I don't think that's where I would focus, because it's legitimately true that there are very different paths to the gold at the end of this. And that path needs to be fairly singular. It needs to be tied to your personality. It needs to be based on what assets you have, what kind of help you have, what kind of firm you have, and so on. So I see lots more viable ways to challenge this than I ever have. I think the biggest problem is people don't develop a habit of implementing whatever that is. Like if that's just outreach on LinkedIn, or maybe it's going to trade shows or taking people to dinner or doing an email list, whatever that is. It's like I've learned to focus less on recommending a specific thing and just coming up with something that becomes a habit for them. It's the difference between eating differently and being more active after your heart attack scare versus just having a lifestyle that's active all along. And when people aren't doing new business, it's not because they haven't figured out what the right method is. It's because they just haven't been consistent with something. So that's what I would want to fix if I could wave a magic wand.
Well, no surprise. If you listen to Two Bobs, you probably won't be surprised with what David has to say. He's very adamant about building the right habits. That's something that he's kind of a drum that he's beat over the years. So I thought that was a good perspective, and it speaks to the mindset that you have to have as a business developer.
Right. The focus is critical. And, one of the things that comes into my conversations often with my clients, with those doer sellers, those engineers and consultants and architects that I work with that don't sell all the time, is kind of uncovering the specific tools and approaches and techniques that you use when you go and create new business, when you prospect, when you do outreach, in your sales process, finding out the things that work for you best and just continuing to practice and improve on those things as you move towards mastery. Because there's a whole bunch of tools, a whole bunch of approaches, a whole bunch of ideas out there. And there's the whole jack of all trades, master of none thing. And David's comments are focused on, the mastery. They are focused on finding the things that you can build habits and good muscle memory around, and constantly revise, review, change, and improve those specific things that you've built habits around to develop excellence and mastery when it comes to finding and winning new work.
Do you know the second half of that adage?
Yeah, right. We've mentioned this. I know we've mentioned this in the past, or at least I've written about
A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Oh,
so it's actually kind of counterintuitive. Anyway, that's a quick aside. But yeah, I tend to agree with you that building habits over time and building muscle around marketing and sales habits, I think is really critical. And so what I mean by that is, we mentioned earlier, let's say marketing is about positioning and sales is about guiding buyers. Then, building a healthy marketing habit like this podcast that we're doing, or if you send a weekly newsletter, or if you write a weekly blog post, or if you post regularly on LinkedIn. I think any one of those is a viable way to establish yourself as an authority and to position yourself in the marketplace. But then kind of on the other side of the coin, that's not enough, right? Just positioning yourself and just marketing yourself isn't enough. You need to still build good, healthy sales habits, and that's having those conversations, networking and practicing, empathy and tactical empathy in your sales process, and guiding buyers through that. So, and there's different ways to do that. So I think that's one thing that I liked about what David had to say is that, you can tailor those to your personality so it's natural for you.
Right.
All right. So let's get to our last clip. And this is from Blair Enns, who is the other Bob in the Two Bobs. And I really liked what he had to say, and it kind of it prompted us to even go to our content calendar and say, oh man, we need to create an episode around what Blair had to say.
Yeah.
So I think y'all will really enjoy this.
Yeah.
Blair, what's one thing you think is completely broken about the way firms go about developing new business?
I think it's the stereotypes around the greater sales function. We don't even call it sales, right? We call it new business or business development. And there's a lot wrapped up in there. I've kind of built a business around on that friction. You've got this expert advisor or practitioner of some kind, a professional who's expected to show up in the engagement a certain way. And then when they go into sales mode or business development mode, they adopt a different personality. We're all kind of constrained by these fallacies of how we think salespeople should behave. Like the salesperson should have the answer, not the question. The salesperson has to be brilliant, has to always have know exactly what to say. There's just too many statements, not enough questions, too much pressure to be somebody you're not. So I see it as David and I did a podcast episode on it. I've written a blog post on it. I call it the dichotomy of the expert salesperson. You're an expert first and a salesperson second, and then you adopt these sales techniques that might be applicable in other domains and are not applicable. I'm not saying not everything, like there are some aspects of selling that are universal, but what's broken is the assumption that expertise of any kind can and should be sold same way that products are sold or transactional services are sold. Drop the salesperson persona, be yourself, do what David said, which is like pick one or two things and just be consistent. Just like hosting a podcast, when you're in a conversation with the host and it's a normal human, and then the audio kicks on and they start recording and they turn into some weird
Hello, everybody.
host.
Welcome to Podcasting and Professional Services. I'm John Tierman.
Yeah, that. Dave and I have talked about that
Thanks,
a lot.
Blair.
No, you don't do that at all.
That's
You are
exactly.
legitimately, you are yourself. You're the same person before we started recording as you were when we hit record. But David and I have both been interviewed by people who we have this great conversation with a great human being. The record button, the red light goes on, and they turn into a 1980s radio DJ. And then that slowly ebbs away. After about 5 minutes, they're back to themselves, but they feel like they need to open that way. Okay, is this, can we continue with the airing of the grievances? So Mark, what did you think about what Blair had to say?
It was so good. I've heard him speak to this in the past. I believe he's got some written content about this as well. And I love it. And there's some common threads between what Blair had to say and also what Jeff McKay mentioned is and I love it. And I've witnessed it. I've observed it with individuals that I work with. People assign all these sort of negative behaviors and characteristics to sales and to salespeople. Yet, when people are put into, and I'm talking about the professionals that I work with, when they are put into a sales position, they awkwardly and strangely adopt all these really bad sales behaviors that immediately turn everyone off. And I don't get, like, what are they? I think it comes from the old bad movies.
Yeah.
Right. Glengarry, Glenn Ross. It comes from Tin Men. It comes from all these legacy old movies. It comes from cliches. It's just this persona that, well, if I'm going to sell, I need to be behaving like a salesperson, and this is how they behave. And they draw from these decades old personas and little bits and pieces of memories they have in their head, and all of a sudden it pops up, and you're thinking, where did that come from? So yeah, I see it often. And it's strange. And that's one of the things I think that I appreciate about David and Blair specifically, is they're able to bring these topics to light in a way that all of us have maybe seen or are familiar with, but they're able to, bring language and descriptors to it that make those things really kind of relevant and apparent to all of us. So I think it's enjoyable. It's a good one.
Yeah. I think he calls his written piece the dichotomy of the expert salesperson.
Right. It's a good one.
You're right. Is there is this lack of understanding of what it means to be an effective salesperson, and I think also on top of that, selling professional services is a lot different than selling other different kinds of products or services. My first job out of college, I went door to door to businesses trying to sell office supplies. So I would lead with like a ream of paper, and I would need to build rapport and close a sale all within a matter of like 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
And that's completely different than nurturing relationships and building trust over months and perhaps even years. So it's just a kind of like a different mindset, and it's a different industry, and we all need to adapt to this kind of like longer trust fueled sales process.
Totally agree. Yeah. So these 4 voices were so wonderful to have them as part of our podcast. We are appreciative and thankful for their desire and to sit down with you, John, and talk. So that was great, and we really hope that they continue the great work that they're doing. Both Jason and Jeff and David and Blair have been publishing their podcast for years. Right. It's, they're
17,
5
18
plus, something like that.
That's
so
when they launched. Yeah.
They're going for a long time, and it's continuing. It continues to be fantastic content. It's at the top of my playlist all the time. And, if they by chance, I know David's even said that he never listens to podcasts. But if they do, this is a big thanks to all of them for contributing their voices and their thoughts to Breaking BizDev.
Excellent. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode, Mark. I enjoyed Jason and Jeff's and David and Blair's perspective on what they believe is broken, and I'm kind of glad that they all kind of coalesced around a similar theme. It made making this episode a breeze.
Right.
So
right. It's that mindset that we show up with, that attitude that we bring to confusing, complex sales sometimes, and it's super critical. So yeah, great episode. Thanks, John. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.